What if I told you that the most vulnerable person in any room isn't the one with actual weaknesses, but the one who shows them? You know the type. Admits when they're struggling, asks for help openly, shows vulnerability thinking it creates connection. Society calls them authentic. Robert Greene called them something else entirely. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this person becomes a target for exploitation, manipulation, and attack, while people who conceal their weaknesses accumulate power that the openly vulnerable never access. Or maybe you're that person who thought showing weakness was strength. But first, let me show you exactly what I mean. You're in a high-stakes business negotiation, and two leaders present their positions. First, there's Karen, who openly admits her company's challenges, shares her concerns about the timeline, explains her limitations hoping for understanding. Classic authentic vulnerability. Then there's Robert, who presents only strength, addresses concerns with confidence, reveals nothing about his actual constraints or fears. Who walks away with the better deal? Hold that thought, because what I'm about to tell you will flip everything you believe about vulnerability and power. Karen's honesty just gave the other side every piece of information they need to exploit her position. Robert's concealment just forced them to negotiate without knowing his actual limits. Karen thought vulnerability would create trust and collaboration. Robert understood that showing weakness invites testing, not empathy. So why does modern culture tell you that vulnerability is strength when it actually makes you exploitable? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You celebrate vulnerability because you've been taught a dangerous lie that benefits people who understand actual power. Greene spent decades studying power dynamics, and what he discovered was this: society doesn't value vulnerable people, it exploits them. People who show weakness aren't respected, they're tested. Because openly vulnerable people prove that everything we've been taught about authenticity and connection is actually advice that keeps naive people weak, while strategic people accumulate power at their expense. But here's what Greene knew that nobody talks about. The person who never shows weakness isn't heartless. They understand that power requires perception of strength regardless of internal reality. While vulnerable people expose their weak points, strategic people protect theirs absolutely. And that protection, that's exactly what separates people who command respect from people who invite exploitation. But to understand why, we need to dig into the brutal truth about why showing weakness destroys power. Greene wrote, "When you show yourself to the world and display your talents, you naturally stir all kinds of resentment, envy, and other manifestations of insecurity. But when you show your weaknesses, you invite attack." But what happens when you've been taught that showing weakness is authentic strength? If you've ever been attacked for showing vulnerability, this video is for you. Like, subscribe, and let's understand real power. Leave a comment about the last time showing weakness made you a target instead of creating the connection you expected. That's the person who never shows weakness. They're a wall that others can't penetrate or exploit. Has struggles but never displays them publicly. Faces challenges but maintains appearance of control, experiences doubt but projects only certainty, never admits limitations to competitors, never reveals fears to those who might exploit them, never shows vulnerabilities that could become targets. And this creates power. Because if strength doesn't require authentically showing your struggles, if respect doesn't demand vulnerability displays, if authority doesn't need you to admit when you're overwhelmed, then what does that say about all the weakness you've been showing thinking it was courage? But here's where it gets really interesting. Greene discovered something that explains why people who show weakness lose power while those who conceal it accumulate it. And it has everything to do with human nature that vulnerability culture denies. Remember that shift in perception when someone admits weakness to you? Greene had a name for it. And once you understand what it is, you'll never show weakness again. Quick question. When was the last time someone showed you their weakness and your respect for them increased rather than decreased? Not your affection, not your sympathy, your actual respect for their capability and power. Can't remember? That's because humans don't work that way. Greene discovered that vulnerability culture isn't about human reality. It's about disarming people who might otherwise build power. He called this Law 46 of power: never appear too perfect, but never show real weakness. The appearance of minor flaws makes you relatable. Showing actual weakness makes you a target, and in our culture, the biggest deception is conflating these two completely different things. But here's what Green knew. We're told to be vulnerable, to show our struggles, to admit when we're weak. We're promised it creates connection, builds trust, demonstrates courage. Not because it does any of these things with powerful people, but because it identifies who can be exploited. Think about your last admission of weakness. Did powerful people respect you more? Or did they file that information away for future use? The person who never shows weakness doesn't get that vulnerability culture validation, but they also never become targets. And somehow, this is the part that breaks vulnerable people's understanding. They're respected more, trusted in high-stakes situations more, and given power more often than people performing vulnerability. Green wrote, "The best deceptions are the ones that seem to give the other person a choice." What vulnerability culture does is make you think showing weakness is a choice when it's actually programming that keeps you exploitable. That it creates connection when it actually creates targets. That it demonstrates strength when it actually broadcasts where to attack you. But what if you're not being authentic? What if showing weakness is being strategically foolish in a world where perception determines everything? Here's what the personal development industry doesn't want you to know. Showing weakness doesn't create the outcomes vulnerability culture promises. Everything you've been taught about authentic vulnerability is designed to keep ambitious people from building real power. Green wrote, "Everyone admires the bold, no one honors the timid. Boldness requires projecting strength even when you feel weak. Timidity is showing weakness and hoping for sympathy. The powerful understand something most never access. Perception creates reality and power dynamics. While you're showing authentic weakness, they're projecting strategic strength. While you're admitting limitations, they're displaying only capability. While you're being vulnerable, hoping for connection, they're being strong and receiving respect. This is why showing weakness destroys your power. You're not creating connection with powerful people. You're identifying yourself as exploitable. Remember Karen from the negotiation? While Robert was concealing his actual constraints and negotiating from strength, Karen was revealing every limitation, giving the other side a roadmap to exploit her position. Her vulnerability wasn't courage. It was strategic incompetence. Green called this Law 3. Conceal your intentions. Your weaknesses are your intentions made visible. When you show them, you've shown exactly where you can be pressured. But here's the really crazy part. Showing weakness feels brave. It feels like you're being real. It feels like authentic strength. And that's exactly how vulnerability culture maintains itself. By making strategically foolish behavior feel like moral courage. So you keep showing weakness, keep getting exploited, and keep believing the problem is that you weren't vulnerable enough. Green believed that conserve your forces and energies by keeping them concentrated at their strongest point. The person who never shows weakness conserves their power. They don't dissipate it through vulnerability displays that invite testing, and that conservation gives them advantage over people broadcasting their weak points. Now we get to the real reason society teaches you to show weakness. And it's not what you think. This isn't about connection. This is about control. Green wrote, "The perfect courtier thrives in a world where everything revolves around power and political dexterity. But society needs you to not be a perfect courtier. They need you to show weakness so you can't accumulate power. Think about it. Our entire vulnerability culture depends on one thing: ambitious people revealing their weak points. You're taught to share your struggles publicly. You're told to admit when you're overwhelmed. You're encouraged to show when you're uncertain. The person who never shows weakness looks at this culture and asks one simple question: why would I give potential competitors and exploiters a map of where to attack me? And nobody has a good answer because the answer is about control, not authenticity. They have power through concealment, strength through strategic projection, advantage through never revealing exploitable information. This makes them dangerous. Dangerous people threaten systems built on everyone revealing their weaknesses. But here's the deeper fear that keeps vulnerability culture alive. What if everyone stopped showing weakness and started building real power? What if people started protecting their weak points instead of broadcasting them? What if strategic concealment became the norm instead of authentic vulnerability? If that happens, the people currently in power lose their information advantage. They've maintained power by getting others to reveal weaknesses while concealing their own. And people who understand this dynamic while building capability become unstoppable. The person who shows weakness represents someone who will never accumulate real power. Someone who identifies themselves as exploitable. Someone who maintains the power imbalance by voluntarily revealing where they're vulnerable. Green observed, keep people off balance and in the dark by never revealing the purpose behind your actions. The person who never shows weakness keeps others off balance. Nobody knows where they're actually vulnerable, so nobody knows where to attack. But here's where this gets personal, because Green himself studied countless examples of what happens when people show weakness versus when they conceal it, and the pattern is undeniable. Robert Greene spent decades researching power dynamics across history and cultures, and his findings prove this. Leaders who showed weakness were attacked. Figures who revealed vulnerabilities were exploited. People who admitted limitations were tested until they broke. Greene documented thousands of examples across history of strength being rewarded, weakness being punished, concealment creating power, revelation inviting exploitation. Sound familiar? That's exactly the pattern between people who accumulate power and people who show vulnerability. But here's what Greene knew from studying history. He had discovered something that never changes. That human nature responds to displays of strength and tests displays of weakness. That vulnerability invites attack, not empathy, from those seeking power. That showing weakness doesn't create connection with powerful people. It identifies you as someone they can dominate. And from that research came laws that explain how power actually works. The 48 Laws of Power, the principle of never showing weakness, the reality that perception matters more than truth, the understanding that revelation is always dangerous. All of these concepts shape how strategic people operate today. They all emerged from studying what actually creates and destroys power versus what we wish created connection. This is the pattern throughout history's powerful people. They appeared invulnerable even when they weren't. Caesar never showed weakness even when threatened. Churchill projected only strength during Britain's darkest hour. Powerful leaders throughout time understood that showing weakness invites the end. But vulnerability culture calls this toxic because people who never show weakness can't be controlled or exploited easily. The person who never shows weakness today is following ancient wisdom. And just like history's powerful figures, they're not trying to be authentic through vulnerability displays. They're trying to accumulate and maintain power through strategic concealment. And that concealment looks inauthentic to people who've been taught that showing weakness is strength. Here's what Greene knew from studying power across centuries. People who show weakness don't get empathy from those who matter. They get tested, exploited, and eventually dominated. But maybe you're starting to recognize yourself in this description. Maybe you've been showing weakness thinking it was strength. Greene wrote, "Do not leave your reputation to chance or gossip. It is your life's artwork, and you must craft it, hone it, and display it with the care of an artist." But crafting a powerful reputation requires recognizing these signs that showing weakness has cost you. Let me show you these signs. If you recognize them, understanding this will transform how you present yourself. First sign, people have used your admitted weaknesses against you. You shared a struggle openly, and later someone used that information to undermine you. You revealed a limitation, and someone exploited it. Your vulnerability gave others the information they needed to attack you. That's not you trusting the wrong people. That's you showing weakness and human nature responding predictably. Second sign, you've noticed people respect you less after vulnerability displays. Traditional vulnerability culture says, sharing struggles creates connection. You share authentically and notice people treat you differently. Less seriously, less capable, more expendable. Every vulnerability display has decreased respect rather than increased it. Sound familiar? That's not them being bad people. That's human nature responding to displayed weakness. Third sign, competitors and rivals note your admissions carefully. You mention a challenge and you notice certain people become more interested. They file away your revealed limitations. They test you more after you've shown weakness. Your vulnerability has become competitive intelligence. Fourth sign. The people with real power in your life never show weakness to you. Your boss doesn't admit when they're struggling. Your successful mentor doesn't reveal their doubts. People with actual power maintain appearance of strength while you've been showing vulnerability. The pattern is obvious once you see it. Fifth sign. Your authenticity hasn't led to the outcomes vulnerability culture promised. You've been vulnerable, shared struggles, admitted weaknesses, but you haven't gained deeper connections with powerful people, haven't built more trust in high-stakes situations, haven't been given more opportunities. Vulnerability has made you relatable to other vulnerable people, but not to anyone with power. Sixth sign. You feel you have to be strong for others, but they don't reciprocate. You support others through their admitted struggles, but when you show weakness, you're alone. People take your strength for granted and exploit your weakness. The vulnerability is one-directional. Seventh sign. You've been told you're too honest or share too much, but kept doing it. People have signaled that your vulnerability displays are strategically foolish, but you believed in authenticity over strategy. Your weakness shows have continued despite evidence they harm you. You've been taught these are signs of your courage and authenticity. You've been told that vulnerability is strength, and the outcomes will eventually match the promise. Green would tell you you've been trained to disarm yourself. When you stop showing weakness and start protecting your vulnerable points, you gain access to real power. Not the false power of being seen as authentic and brave, but actual power that comes from others not knowing where you can be attacked, pressured, or exploited. This is why powerful people project strength. When you're not revealing your weak points, you can't be strategically attacked there. This is why they're given opportunities vulnerable people aren't, because high-stakes situations require people who appear capable of handling them, and weakness displays signal incapability. But accepting this truth, that showing weakness destroys power regardless of what vulnerability culture promises, that's the hardest part. Now comes the practical question. How do you protect yourself in a culture that demands vulnerability? Green believed that never waste valuable time or mental peace of mind on the affairs of others. That is too high a price to pay. But once you understand showing weakness costs you power, you need a framework for strategic strength. First, separate private reality from public presentation. Feel whatever you feel privately. Struggle however you struggle internally. But publicly project only strength and capability. Your private experience can be vulnerable. Your public presentation must be strong. This isn't being fake. This is understanding that power is perception. Second, learn to deflect weakness inquiries without revealing. When someone asks if you're struggling, "I'm handling it," is a complete answer. When someone probes for your limitations, "That's not a concern," closes the topic. You don't owe anyone access to your vulnerable points. Strategic people deflect these probes automatically. Third, develop what Green called strategic opacity. This means revealing nothing that could be used against you. Your fears, your doubts, your limitations, stay private. Your strength, your capability, your confidence, stay public. People can't exploit what they don't know. But here's the most important part. You have to accept that powerful people will never reward your vulnerability the way vulnerability culture promises. Society has sold you a dangerous lie that showing weakness to powerful people creates trust and connection. The reality is that powerful people note your weaknesses and use them. Green understood this from studying history. Every powerful person maintains strategic concealment while encouraging others to be vulnerable. Your real weaknesses will exist regardless. Your job is ensuring they're never displayed in ways that make you exploitable. Your struggles might be significant. Your challenges might be real. Your limitations might be substantial, but showing them publicly serves no strategic purpose. Think about it. Every person who accumulated significant power learned to conceal weakness while projecting strength. Green documented this pattern across all of history. Leaders who showed weakness lost power. Figures who maintained strength regardless of internal reality kept it. But when their strategic concealment enabled them to survive challenges that vulnerability would have made fatal, The wisdom of never showing weakness became undeniable. Their supposed inauthenticity turned out to be the only way to maintain power in a world that tests weakness. The same principle applies today. The person who never shows weakness accumulates power that vulnerable people voluntarily give away through revelation. Here's what nobody tells you about never showing weakness. You will have power, but you'll be called inauthentic. Let me say it again. Green wrote, "The moment of victory is often the moment of greatest peril." In the heat of victory, arrogance and overconfidence can push you past the goal you had aimed for. You've been maintaining strategic strength while others perform vulnerability. You've been concealing weaknesses while they broadcast them. And that concealment gives you something vulnerability culture can't provide. The ability to negotiate from strength without others knowing your limits. The ability to command respect based on projected capability. The ability to avoid being tested in your weak areas because nobody knows where those areas are. But your power won't make you popular in vulnerability culture. It won't fit the authentic sharing narrative that modern society celebrates. Instead, you'll be called closed off, inauthentic, emotionally unavailable. People will say you don't share enough, don't open up, keep walls up. And that's perfect. Because those walls are protecting your power. When you never show weakness, some people will feel excluded from your inner experience. Vulnerability culture adherents will call you fake. People who showed their weaknesses will feel judged by your strength. And none of that matters because you'll have what they'll never have: actual power. Society teaches vulnerability because weak people are controllable. They prove that maybe the problem isn't inauthentic people who won't show weakness. Maybe the problem is a culture that convinced ambitious people that revealing their vulnerable points was somehow strength. If you're someone who's been exploited for showing weakness, if you've noticed powerful people never reciprocate vulnerability, if you've been called inauthentic for protecting your weak points, Green would recognize you immediately. You're not closed off. You're not fake. You're not emotionally unavailable. You're understanding that showing weakness invites exploitation in a world where power determines outcomes, and that strategic concealment is the mark of powerful people, while vulnerability display is the mark of the exploitable. The question isn't whether you should be more vulnerable. The question is whether you'll continue showing weakness to people who will use it against you. Because Green was right about power dynamics. When you show yourself to the world and display your talents, you stir resentment. But when you show your weaknesses, you invite attack. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is maintain appearance of strength regardless of internal reality, even when vulnerability culture calls that inauthentic. The person who never shows weakness isn't society's closed book. They're proof that power requires strategic concealment that vulnerability culture actively opposes. And that's exactly why vulnerable people resent them. If this video made you understand why showing weakness has cost you power, or if you recognize yourself as someone who's been exploited for authenticity, let me know in the comments. What happened when you showed weakness expecting connection but received exploitation? And if you want more content about real power dynamics that vulnerability culture hides, subscribe and hit that notification bell because we're just getting started with truths about power that society doesn't want you to hear.